Thank you, Bode. And thank you, Bill Best, for your comments, and to Bode for putting this together. Much appreciated. I'll be very brief. This is Anthracite Mining Heritage Month. We do this every January. We've been sort of doing it for 24 years. We began with the 40th anniversary of the Knox mine disaster, which for our friends from Wales, you may know that it was the last major mining disaster in anthracite when the Knox Coal Company in 1959, on this date, mined illegally under the Susquehanna River, the beautifully named Susquehanna River, Indian name. And 12 men died, never recovered, but 69 got out. And we've spent the last 24 years commemorating the Knox and having programs and family members speak and films and music. This year is a departure. This year and Bode and I and others have been talking about this for a long time, kind of look beyond Knox in terms of things like historical preservation, things like collective memory, interpretation, understanding of what this disaster means, and indeed what the anthracite era means for American history and regional history, and Pennsylvania history. So this is a first in a real attempt to get beyond Knox, and we're delighted to have 4 outstanding speakers from the Welsh industrial heritage, industrial preservation effort. We met them last summer during our tour of the UK. 12 travelers from the US went over to the UK, England, Scotland, and Wales, and we looked at how they do historical preservation, and they do a very good job. And we're trying to learn from that. So I welcome everyone. I know we have, 14 people on Zoom, or is it 16 now, people on Zoom? We have several people in the audience, and welcome. And I'm going to sit here and learn right along with you and enjoy this afternoon to commemorate the Knox mine disaster and the 12 men who died. Thanks very much. Back to you, Bode.
Thanks, Bob. And I apologize. We're not quite sure where that second feedback is coming from. But everything is muted. Okay. Right. Okay. Yep. So sorry, guys, we're having a lot of feedback here. And then Bill just gave us the so we turned off the camera, the audience camera. So why don't we go ahead and have our guests from Wales talk about their museum. So so why don't we start with Di? You want to talk about the Big Pit?
Hi everybody, Rhondda, as it would be over there, good afternoon, or Noswaith as it would be over here, good evening. My name is Di Price. I am the head of Big Pit. I'm originally from Aberystwyth in Ceredigion, so I'm not from South Wales, but I've worked for Amgueddfa Cymru, which is the sort of centralised national museum in Wales for about 24 years now, and I'm responsible for both Big Pit National Coal Museum and for the National Roman Legion Museum. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm not going to focus entirely on the museum myself, because I'm going to bring my colleague Ceri Thompson in to talk some of that. And in fact, actually, I'm going to bring Ceri in first because he's going to talk about Big Pit before it became part of Amgueddfa Cymru, when it first switched from becoming a mine to a, if it's okay, I'm going to hand over to you, Ceri, and ask you to do a little bit before I come back in.
Okay. Prynawn da, noswaith dda, beth bynnag. Anyway, my name is Ceri Thompson. I'm the curator at Big Pit National Coal Museum. I left school at 16 and worked underground in Cwm Colliery in Bode, which wasn't anthracite, it was coking coal, the best coking coal in the world, which is why they shut us down. Anyway, after finishing in the colliery, there wasn't any jobs about because this is South Wales in 1980s. So I went to an adult education college in North Wales, then to Cardiff University. And I was following the industrial theme all the way through my studies. I even studied Welsh industrial poetry. Okay, so you work that one out. And then I volunteered and got paid employment in various organisations. And eventually, cut the long story short, I joined Big Pit in 1999 because by then the National Museum of Wales was taken over. Okay, now Big Pit itself was a working mine until 1980. Okay, the last face it worked was oh God, I've forgotten the name of it now. Well, the Garrow Seam one, that was about 2 foot high, which wasn't like I was working in the Cwm, which is about 6 foot high. But anyway, when they closed it down, they'd already earmarked it to become a museum. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. One was that it was quite a small colliery. It was a shallow colliery, so they wouldn't have real problems in taking cages up and down the shaft. There was only one major shaft there, because our second way out is actually a little drift mine where you can walk in. Okay, so you haven't got the cost of 2 shafts. Ventilation, a former mechanization officer of the National Coal Board said that Big Pit could be ventilated by a moth flexing its wings. Okay, it's natural ventilation. Having said that, Big Pit, and I've looked at a lot of the plans, is the most complicated area I've ever seen in my life, because it was just one of about 300 pits in the Blaenavon area. And because they were all quite shallow, they were all interjoined all over the place. So it's really complicated. The pit I worked in was sunk in 1909 and then closed in 1986. And it was the same shafts and working in the same areas, but Big Pit is slightly different. It was also self-draining because we are not traditional mines at the bottom of the valley, because the bottom of the valley was the ironworks, which we fed into. So we're on the side of the hill. So the water goes away, if you know what I mean. Millions of gallons a day pass through. Now, this wasn't a problem before, but now with all the new health regulations and what have you, we got reed beds and all sorts of things, which again is expensive to run. But originally, of course, it was self-draining, self-ventilating, easy access, great, yeah. It really followed on from the Slate Museum, Gloddfa in North Wales, which I hope you'll go and see. This isn't the National Museum of Wales Museum, this is the other one. But that was opened up in the late 70s, and because it was so popular, they wanted something equivalent to South Wales. So, of course, we got Big Pit, didn't we? You know, we were the only place that were opened. The original mining museum of Wales is Afon Argoed. That was set up as a volunteer trust and originally was supposed to be based in the colliery, but because of the problems of access to the public, it became basically a building on the hill away from it all. Okay, but it's still manned by ex-miners, all in the 70s and 80s, obviously. But that was the first dedicated mining museum in Wales. And Rhondda Heritage Park, where Darren came from, I was heavily involved with that as a guide and a assistant curator, and I also built the underground with a gentleman called Ivor England, who was the Marxist Lord Secretary of Mardy Colliery, which is known famously around the world as Little Moscow. So there's a very left-wing history to the mining museums in Wales. Darren, of course, is a staunch Tory, but you know, but the rest of it came out of the people, most of these places. I'd let Di have a chat in a minute, because by the late 1990s, we were having problems in Big Pit. I wasn't there then, so I'm saying we. But they were having problems because a lot of money used to come via the National Coal Board, or then the British Coal Organisation, which if you wanted a lorry, they'd send one up. If you wanted a fitter, they'd send one up. If you wanted a bit of machinery, they'd send it up. That all stopped with the privatisation of the coal industry. So we're in a bit of problems. And so the director then, Gareth Gregory, basically went to the Welsh government and said, well, if we don't get any money in the next couple of weeks, basically Big Pit will shut down. Now, the local council were worried about that, because it would have been cheaper to fill the shaft with guineas than it would be to close it all down. You can't just leave a colliery. So it's very expensive. And anyway, to cut a long story short, the government, talking to the National Museum of Wales, took us over, and we became, what was the site then? The 6th site, was it? Right? 6th, 5th?
That's right, yeah, it was the 6th, because
6th site,
Swansea
6th
came
site
up.
of the National Museum of Wales. Okay, and from there on, Mr. Price, we'll talk about later developments.
Thank you, Ceri. Don't you Mr. Price me now. Yeah, so although this is around about the time Ceri joined, I'm going to take over talking a little bit about after 2000, when Big Pit became part of Amgueddfa Cymru, National Museum Wales. A lot of money then invested in, coming in from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, or Heritage Lottery Fund as it was called then. And that investment meant that really Big Pit was built on the underground experience, having ex-miners taking you underground. And what they were able to do was invest more money in developing the Pithead Baths exhibition, which is the more traditional museum display of objects, and also to introduce what was called then the mining galleries, now called King Coal, which is an audio-visual element which gives you much more of a historical aspect in terms of how mining developed, so the kind of rise and fall of mining in Wales. So altogether, that resulted in 2005 in Big Pit winning the Gulbenkian Award, which was the Best UK Museum Award. The first national museum in Wales to win such an award. One has done it since, so St Fagans in 2018. But it was a tremendous achievement at the time, and Ceri was part of that team and did an incredible piece of work. And it's still the basis on which Big Pit has today. So that's just a little bit of an overview of the museum. We'll talk a little bit more as we go through some of the questions later on. Thank you.
Hi, Bode. I'm assuming I'm
Great,
next
thanks,
up.
Di.
Oops.
Oops. Oh, so it looks like we lost that one.
And I can talk about the slides anyway, so if you can't find them, no problem.
Nope. No, go ahead. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Darren. Let me see. Let me get this back up here. No, just get the full screen. Well, how do I?
There we go. That's no.
Okay. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Darren.
No. That's no problem. I'll first answer a couple of challenges. Kenny calling me a Tory is just about as mistaken as you can ever get. I'll start by giving a disclaimer. I've got a couple of different hats. So I work for the local authority. We're a local authority run museum, so we're not part of the National Museum and Ceri and Di's organisation. We're a standalone museum. So anything I say which is remotely controversial has nothing to do with my role as operational manager of Rhondda Heritage Park and Rhondda Heritage Service wider. If I say anything which is thought-provoking, that's part of my portfolio as a lecturer at the University of South Wales. If I say anything that's remotely controversial, I'll tell you that I've been a card-carrying wobbly. I remember the industrial workers of the world for at least 15 years. So, and that's only because only then I come across them. So yeah, I'm pretty much on the left of things, and I'm sure Ceri and Di would join me in that. So just to pick it up on what Ceri said about the Rhondda Heritage Park. So the Rhondda Heritage Park really sprang from the closure of the Lewis Merthyr pit in 1983. And before we came on air, me and Ceri had a little conversation about the key moment in 1983. Really, there was a stay down strike at Lewis Merthyr, which I think Ceri and Di would agree was probably a pivotal moment. I think if the miners had gone on strike in 1983, there was a chance they might have won. You know, when they went on strike in 1984-85, there was no chance they were going to win. So the failure to back South Wales miners in 1983 was quite a pivotal moment in anthracite history in South Wales. And again, I could go on and on and on about the longer history. And the reason the Tories, you know, took aim at the mining industry in Wales, you know, Ceri mentioned this earlier in our conversation, goes to strikes in 1972, 1974, and onwards and onwards. So it was a political decision to shut down coal mining in South Wales, nothing more, nothing less, really. So we closed as an operational mine in 1983. Ceri was heavily involved in the reinterpretation and the creation of. Ceri mentioned he created the underground. So we've got an underground experience, which you don't actually go down a mine shaft. This is simulation. So you drop down in a lift. It's similar as being underground. All our guides, and again, as Ceri mentioned, are former miners. Although that is problematic, and I think it's worth returning to that topic later on, is when we think about how memorialization, how interpretation moves on post mining, and we're quite a long way post mining. You know, we shut as a museum, we shut as a working mine in 1983. Marty, the last pit in the Rhondda, shut in 1980. So we are a significant way past that. Ceri gave a little history of his own life. You know, my life, I worked for a long time in a company called GKN. GKN were the kind of they came from the Dowless Ironworks, so they got a long history in the area. I'm the fifth generation of my family actually to work at the Lewis Murphy pit. Although my grandfather, he died down a mine, but it was actually Ceri's mine in the Cwm. He worked all his working life at the Lewis Murphy. He got transferred to the Cwm, and 2 weeks later he was dead. And I'm not saying anything about the Cwm there, Ceri, but you know, if he stayed in Lewis, he might be. He wouldn't be still with us now because he'd be a considerable age, but he might be still around. So I've got a massive investment in terms of, you know, what the Ron Heritage Park means to me, what the Lewis Murphy. Going to work every day is a magnificent experience for me, and I really see myself as a torchbearer. It's really important to connect, you know, the people around me with the key themes and the key shift the idea, because we moved in South Wales and across Britain to the idea of me and still we. I'm constantly trying to shift people back in that direction. So in terms of interpretation, again, we'll speak of this a little bit later on. We've just got we just applied for a pot of funding to do something similar to Big Pit, and we created an audio visual digital interpretation, which will allow everybody on site to access 3 levels of interpretation. So you can go in at the base level, which we pitched at kind of primary school level. Then it'll be a public history level, and then a 3rd level would be perhaps suitable for people in this room, which, you know, researchers want to get a little bit more detail. You know, part of the problem with any museum really is the 2-dimensional nature of interpretation. And you look at a board and it's got 200 or 300 words in it. That's way too much text. If you can make that digital, you can flip through screens, you know, look at all the different levels of things. So that's really exciting. I don't know what else I can go into without touching on the themes we're gonna look at really. But yeah, a very similar pathway to Ceri. Career in industry, that came to an end. Went back to the university, retrained, gave a couple of degrees, and ended up sitting where I'm sitting and talking really passionately about South Wales industrial history. So yeah, and I look forward to having a stimulating conversation. So fire away, Bode.
Great, thanks, Darren. So what we're going to do next is we will do sort of a roundtable discussion on it. Number of themes, and I'm going to limit my talking just because whatever this delay is. So, gentlemen, do you have any heritage or interpretive connections to Pennsylvania? And John can answer about our connection to Wales.
Okay, shall I start? Yeah, there's one or two. The only 3D object we've got.
Yeah, go ahead, Ceri. Yep.
The only 3D object we got directly connected with Pennsylvania is the book, which is behind Di in the slide, says 1900. Sister as a birthday present. Now, if she appreciated it a lot, I couldn't possibly think, but that's about the only one we've got, which is actually 3D. I can't find any much else, but the actual cultural connection you got is huge, obviously, because a lot of Welsh people went to Pennsylvania to work, and West Virginia and all the other places. The most famous one is a gentleman called Joseph Parry. I don't know if any of you heard of Joseph Parry. He was a breaker boy, Robert, as you see with your thing behind your head there with the breakers. But he started off in Merthyr Tydfil, went out as a young boy, and he had a scholarship through Aberystwyth University because he was quite a good musician, and he was actually the first Welshman to write an opera, which is quite interesting as well. He also wrote a hymn tune called Aberystwyth. Aberystwyth, which apparently some people say is the background to Nkosi Sikeleli Africa, which is part of the South African national anthem today. So apparently they think it might have been based on that one. Okay, so that's about our biggest one. We're doing a little bit on that at the moment. We've got a new learning officer in Big Pit who was originally working in Cyfarthfa Castle, Ben Price, and he's been doing quite a lot on Joseph Parry. So that will come into our education programs in the future. The other one, major one I've got anyway, is a chap called David Hughes. Now, when he was 15, he was trapped underground along with 4 other men in a mine called Tŷ Newydd, again in Porth. We got all your collections, Darren. Yeah, and this became basically a worldwide interest on this. If you think of the Chilean mining disaster of quite a few years ago, you know, that was quite a big thing, men trapped underground. Well, there was less trapped underground in Tŷ Newydd, but it became worldwide news. Queen Victoria herself sent a photographer down to photograph the rescues and the rescuers. Now, the youngest one was a 15-year-old David Hughes. Now, they gave him a scholarship, and he learned mine surveying, and he went out to Pennsylvania. Now, am I right to thinking there's a Kentucky racecourse in Pennsylvania? No? Nobody's answering me. Nobody? No? Right. But anyway, apparently he designed a racecourse in, they said the Kentucky racecourse. They said the Kentucky racecourse in Pennsylvania. No? No? Unless they made a racecourse for the Kentucky Derby, was it? Because the Kentucky Derby was quite a...
No.
Anyway, whatever. But apparently he designed a racecourse out there and then came back to the Rhondda then in the 1870s, 1880s and designed some of the streets around the top end of the Rhondda in Ferndale and that. So that's another one again, because we've got quite a lot on Tŷ Newydd, but it's interesting to know that he actually found, you know, he found his way out to Pennsylvania again. And there's quite a lot of others. You talked about the Knox disaster, but you got the Avondale disaster of 1869, haven't you? Yeah? No?
Just picking up on the point you made, Ceri, about the learning program. You know, there is going to be finding out more of these connections with Pennsylvania. Yep. Already uncovered some people who've who travelled out from the South Wales area, particularly the Blaenavon area, and actually worked as miners in Pennsylvania. So that's quite exciting that we're going to be able to tell more of those stories and show more of those connections in the future than we've ever done before. So it is something I think we're going to expand on those connections in the coming years.
We've actually got, I don't know if you're aware, but there was an 1842 Education Act, and in the investigation before the act was put into place, which stopped anybody under 10 working underground and all females. But there was a lot of people who were interviewed. So you got a lot of oral history there. It's written oral history, but it is oral history. And my colleague Ben has just found somebody who ends up in Pennsylvania. one of the children who was investigated under the 1842 Act. So that's another little contact. And with modern technology, you can check family history by, you know, from your front room these days, can't you? You know, so there's a lot available. So it's quite interesting that these connections should come out, if you know what I mean.
I think you're going to find some people in the audience at the Anthracite Museum today who have ancestors who came over from Wales and mined anthracite. I'm not sure who's all there, but I did hear that a few of those people are going to be in the audience. And of course, Scranton was
Yeah,
the Welsh capital of America in the late 1800s. And Professor Bill Jones from Cardiff wrote the book about the Welsh of Scranton. And he's been a speaker at the museum more than a few times, including at the sesquicentennial of the aforementioned Avondale disaster. This was in 2019.
Yeah. Did he sing you the Avondale ballad? Did he sing you the Avondale ballad in the talk?
We did. We have.
I thought
In fact,
you did,
there are a few Avondale songs that we sang them all. There's about 4 of them.
Yeah.
Local folk singers have since written more recent ones, but there is the classic one, and I think that was sung at least twice. One at the cemetery in Scranton, the Washburn Street Cemetery,
Yeah.
where numerous of the Welsh victims are buried.
Yeah.
Just jumping in there. You know, can I have my artifact back, please? Because I am 300 yards away from Watchtown. I think it's useful for my friends across the water there to put some context on it. You know, Ceri mentioned Watchtown. Watchtown's 300 yards away from here. If I look out my window, I can see 5 pits in the Rhondda. It's just such a small, compacted area with so much. You know, Ceri mentioned the top of the Rhondda Varks, 6 miles. Rhondda Vow is about 7 or 8 miles long, so it's really, really small. There's an area which again is probably about 3/4 of a mile from me called America Vach. So you look on all the maps of Porth, Ceri mentioned Porth, it's called America Vach. So there was a pub there called the New York. And what's interesting, lots of people talk about migration to Pennsylvania, the Scranton area. If you look at the censuses, like there's a couple on the PowerPoint where you get the first child will be born in Oliphant, the second child will be born in Porth, and another family where the first child is born in Scranton and the second child is born in. So there's an ebb and flow. So it's not just a case of migration to Pennsylvania and people living in Pennsylvania and staying there. There's backwards and forwards. There's lots of, I've come across lots of reports of you know, children in Welsh schools in the 1880s, 1890s, and you know, early decades of the 20th century speaking with American accents. You know, and that's quite a common thing. So the links between the two areas are absolutely unbelievable. I did quite a big piece of work on looking at BAME history in a Welsh context, and that's how we approach that, is the links between the abolitionism, you know, and slave narratives, you know, people, you know, the slave railroad, and then people like Moses Roper, you know, coming to Wales, publishing his slave narrative in Welsh. You know, the links between solidarity between the labour movement with a very small L and the civil rights movement are really strong in your areas. They're strong in our area. You know, Peter Gill and Robson's connection with Wales and South Wales in particular. So I think that, you know, the connections are really, really, really strong. You know, and that's not just in terms of artifacts, but maybe in terms of the transition of ideas. You know, again, we're turning back to the left of things, but unfortunately, that's my point of reference. But I think the links between the two areas in terms of looking at you know, racial equality and equality in the workplace and unionization are really, really important to highlight those. Sorry, I was a bit of a speech there. I do apologize.
Okay, I don't know where you are now, Darren. Right, Bode, where was I?
Well, I just want to let you all know that we're experiencing about a 20-second delay
All right.
between
Okay.
I had to get in. Ceri was using all my best lines. I had them all ready. He said that. So I had to get in.
Okay. I think we're on, like on my little list here, we got some of the key stories. Do you want me to do it with that one? I know Darren's mentioned a few now, but some of the key stories we've got.
Ceri, Ceri, I'm meant to be doing that bit for us,
All
mate.
right, then you carry on.
Otherwise, I'll be in the same position as Darren and I'll never get anything in. I mean, I don't know whether or not Bode and John wanted to come in with anything from your perspective on the question of those connections between Pennsylvania and Wales.
Yeah, do you want to say a few words, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of connection, particularly with not only the mining industry in the area, but also with the not with the coal, I mean, but with the iron and steel in this area as well. The city of Scranton wasn't just a coal mining town; it was also a steel and iron city as well. And a lot of the early industry was actually the iron industry, and the Welsh actually formed the core of the workforce for that industry as well as other early anthracite iron industries throughout the region. And yeah, Darren.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say that's pretty much describes the the coal industry and anthracite industry in Wales. So it starts really from iron and the Merthyr Tydfil area, and then spreads to Aberdeen and spreads across the coalfield. So there's a massive connection there. So it really, the story of coal in South Wales begins with iron.
Very good. Yeah, well, I mean, there's, as Bob Wolensky said, there are people in the crowd today who definitely have Welsh heritage. We still celebrate Welsh heritage today. There's a lot of organizations such as the St. David's Society that are really kind of popular in this area. And we still celebrate St. David's Day in this county. And I myself am, the second generation Welsh American. So my ancestors came over in the 1930s. So, and as you said, Darren, there's some connection because not all of my family in particular came to the United States at once. So they kind of trickled in over a period of about 16, 17 years. I think there's a lot of similarities with other families as well, kind of as you mentioned.
While we wait there for the delay, can I just say that this is one of the themes we use in tackling, xenophobia about migration and reluctance to accept new populations. Is we're all migrants, especially in industrial areas like this. Every single one of us is a migrant. So yeah, I see the pushback from people with Italian surnames in this area where they're talking about economic migrants and they have an Italian surname and their families basically been economic migrants in the first couple of decades of the 20th century. So yeah, I think that's a useful tool to use in terms of interpretation and education as well.
Yeah, the world is a small place, and I think in Wales, and particularly the Welsh government, is very keen on the idea that we are a welcoming nation and that we offer those opportunities for all. And I think it is an important part of our identity, as well as being one that obviously embraces the right to protest in a peaceful way and share your opinions. It's also one that embraces other cultures and other ideas coming in from outside. And that part in, moving on to the next section around the key stories is a big part of what the Big Pit story is, which is about how the Welsh coal industry shaped modern Wales. So, it is very much part of the identity of Welsh people. People will understand it. And that's one of the strengths within Big Pit and places like Rhondda Heritage Park. So people automatically understand and associate themselves with it quite a lot. And it goes beyond Wales. It's how we've helped to shape the world. So again, that's the story that links to you guys over in Scranton as well. So there are all of these connections that are a big part of the story of Big Pit. And then within that, recognizing that Big Pit is part of the Blaenavon industrial landscape. As a World Heritage Site, it is internationally recognized, and it's important that we actively preserve that not just for now, but for future generations in Wales, so that they can appreciate it as well and they understand their place in the world. So it, you know, very much like Darren was talking about before, it's our role to ensure that people understand this now, and that in 20 or 30 years' time, people still understand it and they still recognize that importance, and it still continues to shape who we are because it's important within our national and our cultural identity within it. Now, the other critical part for us in that is in Big Pit, because we have an underground. It's not just enough to have guides who can show people around. We have to maintain that, and that requires craft skills. So for us, it is training apprentices and maintaining those heritage crafts, which, you know, were recognized industrial crafts and now heritage crafts. So make sure that those mining skills survive and that we still have that Big Pit underground experience, you know, beyond my time. And again, to offer working opportunities for people to recognize the importance of those skills. It is a shame that the UK government doesn't recognize that kind of intangible culture, but in the same way that UNESCO does within its World Heritage Sites, because that's critical to us. Is we have people who are learning those skills now, and it also then again comes back to those opportunities. So through this program, we have the first woman working underground again as a guide and as a miner, essentially. Although they're not mining coal, they are still maintaining that underground, and that's the first time in around 100 years that we've been able to do that. So again, it's going full circle in terms of how it's very much about that Welsh identity, about creating those opportunities.
I think that I spot on, and you know, Ceri mentioned water and you know the difference of Big Pit being on you know not on the bottom of the valley. We had a deep mine, so we are currently investigate the possibility of drilling down into the mine working and putting using the water running through the mine workings, the heat exchange to power the entire site. So it's really important to talk about nostalgia, but you know, as Di said, we've got to be relevant as well. So we've got to be relevant to the educational part. We've got to also move on from the toxic idea of carbon fuels as well. So how do we deal with that as museums moving forward with the toxicity of the idea when you know the people have been educated to say the carbon fuels are wrong, and you know there are obviously problems with the environment and horrific problems with the environment, and the phasing out of carbon fuels is happening. So how do we continue to be relevant, and how do we continue to engage with these, you know, with the younger generations while working into what's seen as a toxic industry? I think that's a big challenge, but that's one certainly in Wales, because of the amount of you know emphasis going on green energy. We can have that conversation, so we can talk about, you know, energy production past, present, and future. You know, and that's a conversation we can continue to have and continue to evolve as museums. Sorry, I'm talking too much again. Sorry.
So we're going to limit our comments on this side because of the delay that we're having with the system. But why don't we move on to the next question about do you have new interpretive directions in the last few years? I'm thinking about new voices, new communities, and non-traditional themes.
Shall I jump in? I'll jump in on this one. Right? So we try and tackle a different theme every year. Yeah, I mentioned race, and you know, the Welsh Museum Federation, because we're independent. The Welsh Museum Federation, we managed to get some funding, and we looked at how we deal with race. So we did an exhibition on Paul Robeson and his connection, transatlantic links. The Welsh National Opera actually doing an opera on that. Started in March, I think. So there's one for your notebooks, Ceri and Di. We'll see the Welsh National Opera singing about Paul Robeson, and also the Moses Roper. So this year we're looking at women's history. We managed to get some funding to do some conservation work on minutes from one of the women's labour societies in the Rhondda from 1920 to 1933, which covers a period of the general strike. So getting a woman's perspective and a gender perspective from that is really, really interesting. At the same time, we're doing an all history project on the 84-85 conflict and comparing the two. So trying to, rather than give a superficial understanding of women's impact, you know, give a real in-depth understanding. Next year we look at disability and so on and so forth. In terms of how we interpret things, I mentioned digitization. couple of years, Ceri and Di, because this is a bit cheeky. So we created a VR experience. So it is completely VR. You can go into a drift mine. You go into a lamp room with the VR equipment. Oculus 2, other equipment are available, I'm sure. So you pick up a lamp and it gives you a description of the lamps. You can interact with it. You go into the mine, there's 6 different 30-second films where you can engage. There's a coal face at the end of it. So you pick up a virtual mandrill, smack the coal face and coal falls away, just to engage with younger generations. This is the bit Ceri and Di should listen to. We've cheekily called it Pulch cum Rhondda, which means small. So, sorry, I'm being cheeky. Small pit Rhondda, as opposed to my esteemed colleagues in the big pit in Blaenavon. So there we go. Di's looking angrily at the screen there. So there's lots of we continue to try and evolve and continue to try and be relevant, really. So that's enough for me. Over to you, boys.
Yeah, Darren, it's not a problem at all, mate, because you know we've got to work hand in hand with a lot of these things and develop similar opportunities. You know, a big part of Amgueddfa Cymru's work has been around widening engagement and cultural democracy. So as part of a bigger organisation, we're following through a lot of those plans, and a lot of that work is also at Big Pit specifically has included intergenerational work. So working with different age groups from the community, which won 2019 won a One Voice Wales award with working with Blaenavon on giving those opportunities of bringing young people together and older people and different generations and making them work together, work together, offering opportunities for them to work together and learn from each other. Also working with dementia groups as well. So we offer dementia-friendly underground tours. So opportunities for people with different backgrounds and different experiences to engage in their own way. Like the stuff Darren was talking about with the environmental side of things, we are looking at opportunities to, hopefully as part of a project on the Pithead Bars, to decarbonize that building. So we're using solar power, and by using investment to change things like insulation, air source heat pumps. But ultimately we will have an entirely carbon neutral building, and possibly even using some of the land around us to generate, using solar panels, generate enough energy to run Big Pit, and also to be able to put some of it back into the grid as well. And we're working with Swansea University specific project on some of those elements. So, you know, potential to tell very different stories and take that story of energy that started with coal and bring it forward. I mean, a lot of what Darren's talking about with, you know, changing that narrative around coal being a dirty fuel, actually there are carbon options that are there for the future, and those stories need to be told as well. Also, just kind of picking up on some of the storytelling through the virtual stuff, we've experienced some of the similar things. We've had a Google Underground tour, which, as far as we understand, is the first tour that Google have offered in Welsh, because we do everything bilingually as part of the Welsh language standards. So, you know, a lot of these opportunities, the important thing is we're telling the stories of coal, and that's the critical thing here. Whether it's us doing it, whether it's from the Heritage Park, that's not what's important. Important thing is those things are out there, and we're developing better and better opportunities for people. We're going to bring in Ceri to talk particularly about decolonising collections and some of the work around anti-racism that he's been more directly involved in. Ceri?
Yeah, well, to go back to the beginning, when I started this first, when we put the initial, when we finished off the galleries, you know, the museum galleries, one of the first projects we did was to look at the Eastern Europeans who came into Wales. You know, there's a few names on here I can notice. Yeah, Wolensky.
Here, I'm here.
Yeah, we looked at a lot of the Polish people. I always worked with Polish people. I know Darren will know the amount of Polish, former Yugoslavians, Latvians, Lithuanians, Italians who all came in, you know, to work here and became us. And the same, I did about 25 interviews, I think, with various people, including some I actually worked with. But we were also looking at the West Indian point of view, because we are not looking at, what did you say they call BAME? You don't say BAME anymore, do you? Black and ethnic, you call them a different name now.
World majority.
World majority. We're looking at world majority people, but these are people who worked alongside us, you know, whatever colour they was, nobody cared less, to be honest with them. So we've been looking at that aspect of it again. And one boy I did interview actually said, I hope you're not interviewing me just because I'm black, because I'm a Welsh miner. I want to be talked to like a Welsh miner, not as a black person. So, you know, we got, sorry, we got that sort of attitude as well. They see themselves as being Welsh miners. You know what I mean? Everybody, wherever they are. We had an Indian transfer point attendant who's been called Dai Bangladesh. His father was a doctor in Tonrevel, but Dai worked underground with us. I also had somebody who claimed to be half Cherokee working with us. So as we said earlier on, they came from all over the world here and all became us, not these separate people. LGBTQ, I actually had the largest LGBT collection in the museum before it became a popular subject. And I don't know if you know why that is, but have you seen a film called Pride? No? It's based on the 1984-85 miners' strike, and a group of LGBTQ people based on Engage the Word in London actually twinned themselves up with Banwen, the Delight Valley support group, and bought them a van and travelled back and forth and collected money all across London and whatever. They did make a film of it. If you haven't seen the film, I would look for the film Pride, and it is actually a very good film. But it's that connection between the two. So we had lots of connections. We got a banner that they produced, and we got the badges they produced, T-shirts. A lot of rock groups in the 1980s put benefit concerts for the miners. So all that's coming out of it, you know.
Should note that back in 2016, Ceri and myself attended the Pride Festival and indeed went on the march as well. Ceri was quite a sight with the Pride flag draped around his shoulders, and I think I upset our Director General by insisting on holding his hand as we walked through part of the route.
Yeah. So we've always tried to have connections. We've always thought of ourselves, same as Rhondda, really. We're a people's museum. Most of the staff are from the Rhondda in Rhondda Heritage Park. And up with us, most of the staff are from the area or from the coal fields anyway, you know, with connections in it all. So we do see ourselves as being part of everything, and it doesn't matter what colour you are, what language you speak, or what you look like. You're one of us.
Just building on what Ceri said, the exhibition we did, I actually give a paper on what's happening in Black British history, and there's a recognition that you know the mining areas in South Wales in particular was about solidarity. So regardless of orientation or gender or colour, as long as you were a part of the same idea of maybe a more equal world, you accept it. And I went to school with a number of people from that community, and it was never ever an issue, never singled out, never a problem. You know, it's just I'm quite proud of that, about how accepting, and you mentioned how accepting Wales is. And it's our role to make sure that our communities are continually reminded of those historic links and the links in our heritage and connections with lots of other communities. And again, I had this conversation with Ceri. I'm not keen. We just created a timeline on LGBTIQ plus. I'm not keen on the term timeline when you talk about individual groups. A time lane, perhaps, where we're all heading in the same direction, and you're all talking about just a different section of Welsh history, rather than just talking about groups and separating groups by their ethnicity or their orientation. I don't really agree with that. I've had quite long conversations with, there's quite a big community in Cardiff Bay. So we've got strong connections with the idea of coal production to coal shipments, or pit to port, that idea. And lots of the communities in Cardiff Bay are really ethnically diverse. So we've got strong connections. We're trying to build on those connections. But yeah, I don't want you to think, my friends in America, that Wales is some utopian land of equality, because it's not. But we certainly historically have been accepted.
If you show me a mining community in Europe or really anywhere, I'm going to show you a great deal of diversity. I know many Irish came into Wales to mine coal. You mentioned the Italians. There were Belgians. Many came in from England. you know, and to mine in the Rhondda, or even Scotland. And we have 26 ethnic groups in the anthracite that we acknowledge. And they come from all over the place, mainly Europe. And but this is true if you go to even, you know, gold mining in South Africa. They're mainly Africans, but they come from all over to mine that gold. Mining draws people from all over the place. And how many Cornish miners went all over the world to take their skills, you know, in Mexico and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in this country, you know, all South America. So mining communities are known for their diversity, and I'm really glad you brought this up and to hear what you're doing about it.
Just one last thing. I work with a PhD student, Maya Helm, who's at Cardiff. So a friend of mine in Cardiff, Stephanie Ward, introduced us. So Maya did her undergrad. She's from North Carolina. Maya did her undergrad dissertation on racism and race in the coalfields of Carolina, and she's coming over and she's doing a PhD as a comparative story in South Wales, and she's been working on it about a year, and I work quite closely with Maya, and she's quite amazed at the level of acceptance and the lack of racism and the lack of that. Whereas, you know, she's one of the very few African Americans in her area, and she experienced that firsthand. But she's quite shocked that it doesn't seem to happen in Wales.
It's not just America we colonized Wales. We had a portrait donated just before Christmas, and it's a chap called John Hughes, who was an engineer in Merthyr Tydfil, who was then went to work up in London as an engineer in ironworks. But the Tsar of Russia asked him to go into an area of Ukraine, which was basically empty at the time, and to create an ironworks and ancillary coal mines and a city. And that city became Donetsk. And I think under the new, the illegal, but new, what do you call it? The People's Republic of Donbass, whatever.
Yeah.
They've now produced their own postage stamp, and John Hughes is on that. So they are starting to recognise where they've come from. You know, the Welsh influences, you know, in Ukraine. You know? So it's an interesting world. Like I said, there's nobody.
Do you want to go Patagonia as well, Kev?
Yeah, exactly. Patagonia as well. Yeah, there's just about everywhere. And like I said, it's a lesson, because I don't know, I think in the 1980s and going on to Brexit, it was all about racism and immigration, as if it hadn't happened before. You know, it was quite annoying. Well, where do you think we all came from? My great-grandfather came from Blackrock in Somerset, you know, in England, like, you know, so we all come from somewhere. And I got relatives now in America, South Africa, Canada, Australia, who went out in the 20s and 30s to look for work abroad. You know, we're all a big mixture here. And I think we tended lately to sort of come back into ourselves, haven't we? You know what I mean? And say, no, these are outsiders, you know, and it's never been the case, and it won't be the case.
The problem's never that way, Kev, or that way. It's always.
Yeah, that way. Yeah, we did a lot with immigration, with refugees down in Cardiff as well. We were asked to go along and talk to refugees from Syria and Afghanistan about Welsh culture, as far as coal mining is Welsh culture, you know. So we do a lot of that, and I'm always surprised really that the people you talk to who've escaped from these countries, they're car mechanics and, you know, IT experts and everything. You know what I mean? They're no difference than anybody else. They're the same as we are. Like, you know,
If you remember, Ceri, we had a volunteer in Big Pit recently come out of Afghanistan who'd worked with the British military as security, and so was working with us to, you know, just general jobs around the site, but to improve his English language skills, give him opportunities, get him back into work, and within, I think, 4 weeks he'd found a job, and he was very grateful because he was welcomed with open arms on site and given an opportunity to feel like part of a community.
Yeah. Mind you, how much his English language skills was improved by working in Blaenavon, I don't know. But, So I think that's, what do they say? It's a lesson for the world, as we say in King Cole, don't we?
So why don't we move on to the next question? If you could talk a little bit about how you discuss disasters and
Okay.
important topics to discuss.
When we did, I don't know, when we did the original exhibitions in Big Pit, we covered certain ones. We couldn't cover all of them. So we focused on Senghenydd, which is the biggest mine disaster in the UK. T Newydd, which is where David Hughes, the young boy, was trapped underground. Not so much because there was hundreds killed, because there wasn't. They were killed, there was about 12 or 13 killed. But it was a small disaster, but because it was so media-led. The media had never seen anything like the Rhondda when they came down to the place. They didn't even know we existed. Queen Victoria took an interest. So that's in there. And also, of course, we covered Aberfan. Now, Aberfan is a mining disaster. We've had a few things about that because they thought, what have we got to do with Aberfan? But it's Merthyr Vale Colliery's tip. The NCB boys, the Merthyr Vale boys, saved as many as they could for there and worked through the school. So it's basically a mining disaster. And again, a well-publicized mining disaster. So we did those three. And then, as a sort of an adjunct, because the press always concentrates on big mining disasters with hundreds of people killed, but the biggest death toll is actually 1 or 2 people dying on their own or with a friend underground under a roof fall, being drowned or what have you. So we picked on a chap who had been killed in Castle Colliery in Merthyr Tydfil. It wasn't purely accidental because we were offered a set of tools from the Manchester area with no explanation what he was about. So anyway, we had a chat to them, and the father had been killed underground, and the mother decided that her 2 children would never work in the mining industry. So they moved up to Cheshire, around Manchester. And these tools, which he had used underground when he was killed, were on the wall in the house for years and years and years. So we used him as a sort of an unknown collier, the one who represents the ones on their own, the thousands who died on their own there. And another part of the disaster isn't, again, an explosion or a flood. It's actually chest diseases. Now, you get those in America as well. South Wales, you've got the biggest incidence of chest-related diseases, colony-related diseases in the UK. So if the roof don't get you, or the explosions don't get you, the dust is going to get you. And I think most of my relatives, probably Darren as well, died of dust on the lungs, silicosis, pneumoconiosis. So that's how we cover that one. One thing I did do, back to the Rhondda, sorry, Darren, Cambrian Colliery. Now in 1965, which was the last major disaster in Wales, last major disaster, 31 men killed. And that's in the 1960s when the Beatles are singing and there's minis around and there's mini skirts, and it's a modern world, isn't it? And yet there's still a mining disaster in South Wales, which should have been, ancient history by then. So what I wanted to do with that one is to actually interview as many people as possible and sort of tell the story through their voices. Yeah, do you know what I mean? Have you read The Longest Day? I can't think of the author now. The Longest Day. He looks at the history of the D-Day landings through the participants who were there, and he takes the story through. So I thought, let's try that for a mining disaster. So I interviewed, I included a chap who was blown over. He was the nearest to the explosion when it went off, and he was blown onto his back. Interviewed him. Interviewed one of the mines rescue people who gone down there, because I'm fascinated by how the mines rescue operates, because they, especially in South Wales, they were so professional in what they did. And whatever they did, whether it was the M26 bridge that collapsed, or Aberfan, or Cambrian, or Tower, or what have you, they set procedures what they were doing. So I interviewed one of those about what they were doing there. Interviewed the chap who was on top of the pit watching the bodies coming out. Interviewed somebody who was actually bringing bodies up the coalface to be brought up the pit. A canteen girl who was on the surface at the time, one of the officials. So you're looking at the story and you're humanizing this horrible event, but looking at it from ordinary people, just like anybody else, So,
That's a critical part of this. I mean, ultimately, that's what museums are about. I mean, people
Yeah.
think about museums as being objects and stories, but actually about people. Whichever museum it is, ultimately, it comes back to people.
yeah.
And that you know, that capturing those stories, the work that Ceri's been doing with that over the years is so important, because we can tell them from the perspectives of the people who are involved. And that's actually a big part. You mentioned the mine rescue service. That's a big part of it. We've got a display which shows some of the equipment they used, the importance aspect of how we respond to those situations. And even now, when running an underground in Big Pit, the safety procedures that are in place, we still test for them, we still have emergency winder to be able to deal with any problems that come up from that are important. Our mine manager, who will be retiring in a couple of months, Mr. Hugh Jones, was actually a member of the Mines Rescue Service and was at the more recent mining disaster in Gleision in Swansea, you know, where people lost their lives there, and experiences of people like Hugh in telling their stories, and for us to understand that human element that Ceri talks about is so absolutely vital. And I think is one of the great strengths of mining museums and what we talk about, because they talk about real people's experiences.
Yeah. But you can see how close we are with the mining industry still, in that 3 people who worked in Big Pit were involved with the Gleision rescue, including Hugh, and 2 of the guides. One of them was become a lorry driver now, but there was actually 3 people who were actually bringing bodies out of Gleision. We don't call it a disaster, apparently, because there was 4 men. So 4 men is nothing, is it? You know, it's got to be over 5 men, apparently. But that's the last big one in Wales, and we were involved with that one way or not. Our surveyor also was involved with there, because he was a surveyor in Gleision as well. And at the moment, he's fighting an action against the owners there, or for the owners there. But anyway, that's political. That's how close we are with the industry, you know.
Nothing wrong with political. I agree 100% with what Ceri and I said. And you know, when I first came into this industry, then in terms of heritage industry, it was about numbers. 119 men died in Watstown in 1905, and you know, 3 years before the side behind Dye's shoulder. You know, that Watstown Memorial is probably about 400 yards from me. Well, I know from family experience, four of the men, and I say men because that Watstown 1905 disaster, 119, I think over 50% were under 18. So 4 of the names on that memorial are my wife's family, as Azelle, again, going back to the migration part. But I think, to give you an example why this is so important, because my remit is not just a museum. I'm in charge of the Heritage Service, so I'm out in the community and trying to spread the word, and I look at the memorials right across, you know, my local authority, my government area. So that Watstown disaster is a really good example. Less than 20 yards, there's a lamppost, and on that lamppost, somebody decided to put a dog poo bin, for want of a better phrase. So how disrespectful is that? How much of a disconnection as have you got to have that you're going to put a dog poo bin, you know, less than 20 yards away from the memorial to where 119 men and boys died? So this is why talking about individual stories and creating a narrative that is not about numbers, it's about men, women, and not just, you know, we mentioned men, but it's widows, it's children, it's all those things. What we're looking to do in our local authority is, on each of our memorials, we'll put a QR code, and we allow the community to work with us to do some research, to research every one of those names, and you know, put a story behind them all, and try and engage the community. Because if it's a numbers game, people just become completely blind. As Ceri said, you know, 4 men dying is not a disaster because it's not 5, but how much of a disaster is to their families? A huge disaster. So, you know, and collecting memories, you know, something we are really engaged with. We're working with a company called Avant. So I think Ceri's done some of this. Again, we create a time capsule from Aberfan for the men and women who left the Rhondda and rushed to Aberfan during that disaster to collect those memories. And I sat down and actually wrote down for my father-in-law, my stepfather, his reminder, because he was an 18-year-old collier, down tools, and went to Aberfan. And he told me the story that when he came back, he went to the Lewisworth Club, which was a social club associated to our mine, and they locked the doors and they drank all night, and he's never spoke about that from that day to this until he recounted the story you know, and he's you know, a big, strong, strapping guy, really stoic, but he poured the emotion that came out of him. It was incredible. And they're really finite resources, they're really finite things, and we could lose those so easily. So yeah, dealing with disasters is really difficult, but it's got to be about the individual. It's got about bringing relevance rather than just talking about numbers.
Yeah. Another one we do it lately is, of course, we covered a lot of Arbor Valley, interviewed 12 people, and I was looking at the rescue attempts rather than what normally is looked at, you know what I mean? What did you do? Where were you? What was the procedures and what have you? And one of the groups we picked up was the Salvation Army. Now, if you go back to the 1890s, the Salvation Army is involved with the coal industry. In the Sagera disaster of 1913, 7 Salvationists died underground in the disaster, and also you got photographs of Salvation Army funerals, Salvation Army girls giving out help and what have you. In 1965, when we did Lewisworth, in 1956, sorry, when we did Lewis Cavalry Colony, they are there then, are they there in Aberfan as well? So again, that sort of humanizes the disasters again, you know what I mean? You're looking at ordinary people who just do great things, if you know what I mean. So
there's a comment in the chat there about Philip Bosey's book signing talking about education. The Welsh government there's a new curriculum 2022, so it came out last year. The links each individual student with their place in the community and their community's wider place in the world. So that's something the both myself, Di and Ceri, we're working alongside all educational providers, and we could do a lot more because they could lean on us a lot more. But we work alongside all educational providers to give that child an idea of their own self-worth, but also their self-worth in the wider community and their wider community self-worth. So that's definitely something. And that comes back to what I was saying about nostalgia. Nostalgia's got a shelf life. So in 15, 20 years, people won't have active, real memories of coal mining because the last coal mine in the Rhondda shut in 1990. So that's a long time ago. So we've got to make a shift away from nostalgia to relevance, and it's got to be relevant. But there's lots of stories we can tell there. But I think that is a great point that Philip Mosey's making. Us when we the three of us would be actively engaged with and actually already doing it. What can I just say? This delay just means you just get lots of Welsh talking. So one thing we don't do very well in Wales, we don't do silence. We don't do silence at all.
Ceri can't possibly manage a 20-second delay. We got to about 15 or 16 seconds earlier, and he just couldn't deal with the silence.
I was here. I was here. So I apologize. You lots of talk from Wales, though, my American friends.
right.
So I think what we want to do now is just, we're pushing about an hour, and I want to thank everybody for coming out today. So maybe for some final comments, if you could just mention a quick, a significant addition to your collection and any final thoughts. And if Darren, if you want to mention Lafleur, and I'm going to stop because of the feedback, but.
I'll go first then, because that was a great attempt at clavier, so which is a Welsh word for labour. So I'll come back to the site after this, but I've been a committee member of Clavier, the Welsh Working People's Historical Society, for around a decade. We've got a really diverse membership. If you look at Clavier, which is LLAFUR, which is great for a dyslexic person to come up with that. But yeah, if you want to check that out, there's lots of talks on there. There's talks about kind of all aspects of Welsh mining and Welsh industrial history, and not just industrial history, lots of other things as well. So come and join us. We're a really inclusive society. So that's the Clavier plug done. In terms of on the Heritage Park, again, as you can see, the harmony between the two sites and the heritage sites across Wales are brilliant. So Wales is a place to stay and spend some time. There's so much diverse history and heritage across Wales. So many things to see. The boys mentioned, or Ceri mentioned, the nature of big pitters serving the iron industries. We're a completely different experience, but we engage with each other as well. There's a saying in Welsh: to be a leader, you've got to be a bridge, and that's what we are in Wales. It's pretty connected. We've got lots of history packed into a really small area. So come and see us.
Okay. I think you want to talk about significant collections. We've had quite a few, including John Hughes's portrait. But I think the one that sort of the most poignant to me, and I was actually wondering whether we should collect it or not. There was a little girl, 10-year-old, called Norma Mumford, who was killed in one of the classrooms in Aberfan. Her grandmother basically kept a lot of her stuff because her mother had died in a motorbike accident a couple of years after Norma died, and then her father died not long after as well. So basically the grandmother kept a lot of stuff, and she's now gone into a care home. So the other granddaughter actually asked if we'd like the stuff connected with Norma. And again, pointedly enough, Norma was a bridesmaid 2 weeks before the disaster. So they'd kept the Bible she was given and the posies. You know, this is real tear-jerking stuff, isn't it? You know. So I said, "Are you sure about this? Because you just start, you know, you'd be very sentimental." You know, and they said yes. They said by keeping her items, you're remembering Norma, and Norma will be remembered as long as the National Museum of Wales exists or Big Pit exists. You know. So that's one of the most poignant things I think we've had for ages. Just looking at her in a bridesmaid's dress and thinking, well, 2 weeks later. You know, and again, that humanising the disaster. They're not just 100-odd kids who died under a lot of rubble. There's actually Norma, and there's Gaynor, and there's, you know, Gareth, and all these other people that we've talked to over the years, all involved as well. The people you pass in Tesco's, the local supermarket, without even thinking, and yet they were involved in all these terrible, terrible things. You know.
Yeah, in terms of significant addition, I'm going to take a very different angle in terms of my view on Big Pit, and that is the new staff that we're bringing in, the fact that we are training new people in those skills, and many of them come from mining community. So we have you know, relatives of other mining staff who are on site, so their sons are coming in and they're learning that craft, and they're carrying that on from the blacksmith. And from some of the colliers as well, but also people coming from outside of it. One of our just been qualified as a deputy, left a career in the prison service to take up an opportunity to do what he'd always dreamed of doing and working at Big Pit. So we've got, you know, opportunities for people to come in, and that survival of those skills, preserving those heritage skills, for me, that's the most important thing. Because the underground, having an underground mine, is the unique selling proposition of Big Pit. So it is absolutely vital that we can keep that going, both in terms of having guides, but also having the craft skills such as electricians and mechanics who can run the winder. Unlike the National Coal Museum of England, which has got a lift, we've got a winder. We've got a proper underground experience, which in Wales, which is what is absolutely vital for us. And that's where, you know, to echo what Darren was saying, please come and see all of the things that we've got in Wales. Come and see the different parts of Amgueddfa Cymru. We've got 7 national museums and a collection centre. We've also got in Blaenavon World Heritage Site, Cadw and the Ironworks there. We've also got, you know, World Heritage Centre, the Brecon Beacons National Park, beautiful countryside that you won't see anywhere else in the world. So please come and see us. You will get a great welcome. There are castles all over Wales. There's all kinds of things. Whatever your interest is, there's bound to be things in Wales, the culture and the heritage that you would love to see. So we would definitely welcome you there.
Can I miss my bit out? Can I just start in? Yeah, I think it's wonderful, and I'd advise anybody to see Big Pit and come and see us as well. You know, and come and see the wider, explore the wider area. I give an example. The last pit that shut in the Rhondda was Mardy, and if you walk through Mardy Pit now, lots of it still there, and above Mardy Pit there's a 12th century Norman, or the ruins of a 12th century Norman castle, you know, above the mine. You know, that's the kind of level of history that's in this area. You know, because we haven't got a slightly different offering to Big Pit in terms of we haven't got a wider. We are just, our experience is, our USP then is having all of our guys are former miners. So obviously there's a problem with that as these miners are getting older. So we now go through a process of recording all the miners' memories, creating a holographic image, and then getting AR technology. So you'd ask that image a question and it would respond as appropriately then. So that the miner would be asked a question and he'd have to give you 1,000 different answers, and he selects the right answer and gives you that experience. So it's just really different. But come to Wales, so there's lots to see. You know, I think Di mentioned the castles. Wales has the biggest number of castles per square mile of any nation in the world. That's because of the English, but I didn't say that out loud, right? Okay, just saying.
You could blame something on the Normans as well. I think that's probably a possibility.
Don't
But
blame the
ultimately,
French. Don't blame the French. It's not a French one. As a slight aside, somebody asked, one of my students asked me, why do we call cows and why do we eat beef? That's the Norman conquest. That's the beauty of language. Is the Anglo-Saxon cows and Anglo-Saxon words of beef is of Norman words. So, you know, it's beauty in language.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the stories. You know, with mining history being obliterated in many places, including northeastern Pennsylvania, all that we have is stories. Although we do have 3 underground mine tours in northeastern Pennsylvania, including one right near where Bode's sitting in Lackawanna County. But I know in Wales you also have the wonderful Coal Miners Oral History Project at the University of Swansea, and that's a well-known treasure of oral histories from actual miners and families. And I know you're doing some of that. And we have the Northeastern Pennsylvania Oral and Life History Project, over 500 interviews done by various people. It's at Penn State University in the middle of the state. They are now trying to catalog that. The problem with a lot of these oral history interviews is they're not accessible online. So people have to travel to them, and then you have to use typically old-fashioned technology. They may not even be digitized, although I think that they are in Swansea, and I know they are at Penn State. So I think the next big stage is to get those stories accessible to the public, because as you mentioned, education is vital to this. We've got to bring in a whole new generation to build their enthusiasm, to get involved with the preservation and interpretation and
Well, I
understanding.
want to thank everybody for participating today. And I'm going to try and plug in the camera and show the audience one more time. And we're going to forego questions, but I will collect questions from the audience and forward those to you if we have them. So I want to thank you all again for participating. Let me see.